And we thought that just the Kraken continuing to lose games was the worst thing that could happen. But no, it can definitely get worse. What's cracking, everybody, and welcome back to Kraken R&R, where the Seattle Kraken do, for the 7th time in a row, lose 4-3 this time in overtime to the Tampa Bay Lightning, so they do get at least a point out of it, which is enough to make sure that they have the same 23 points through 28 games that they had through the first 28 games of the inaugural season. That having been said, I would still argue that the start to this season has been worse, considering they had 2 more wins at this point in that inaugural season, as they were 10, 15, and 3 at this point in the inaugural season, and that already is more wins than the Kraken currently have, but even outside of wins in general, which, granted, a win is a win in the NHL, they're all worth the same number of points, but those 10 wins all came in regulation in that inaugural season, where right now, the Kraken are tied with the Montreal Canadiens for the fewest regulation wins at just 5 through 28 games. Though with all that being said, it's probably worth mentioning at the same time that it was at this point 28 games in, or I guess starting with game 29, that things really went off the rails in that inaugural season, as the Kraken lost every game for the next month between the middle of December and the middle of January, losing 9 straight. So it's at least probably safe to say that this season won't continue to go the way the inaugural season did, at least not as bad anyway, but it's certainly not looking great at this point. Now, yes, of course, it's not news to anybody that things have not been going particularly well for the Kraken here to start off the season. In fact, now over a third of the way through, things have been going pretty poorly. However, over these last 2 losses, the first 2 games of the 6-game homestand, things have gone from bad to worse, as the team, while they're still losing games, even if they do pick up the odd loser point here and there with the overtime or shootout loss, have now started to mount up injuries on top of it. We already saw Burakovsky, who just came back from an injury in the same game, go out with an injury in the last game, and is now listed as week to week, so that really does throw into question whether or not he'll actually be able to play by the start of January and the Winter Classic. I mean, it's really hard to say. Week to week could mean anything from a week to a month with that type of thing. I mean, who knows, if things keep going this way for the team, he could just end up being placed on IR to really make sure he's healthy by the time he comes back next time. Either way, he exits in the last game, and now in this game, we get 2 more players exiting and not coming back. And you know what? Let's just get to those injuries and what they might mean for the Kraken going forward as they happen in this game. So we'll jump right into things about 5 minutes through the second period, because that's where the Kraken start playing the game. Okay, fine, we'll start at the beginning, but the first period is hardly worth mentioning at all. The Kraken just don't show up for it whatsoever, and honestly, it's Philip Grubauer that prevents this from being worse than a 2-0 deficit at the first intermission. Especially on the power play that the Lightning get here early on in the first, Grubauer comes up with an absolutely spectacular highlight reel save. As midway through the power play, the Lightning are able to get a pass right across Grubauer's face from the low face-off circle on one side to the low face-off circle on the other side for a one-timer, the pass almost going through the crease for that matter, and Grubauer is still able to dive from one side across to the other and get his glove not only over there in time, but also able to react to that one-timer as his glove goes up over his head to make the save, absolutely robbing a goal here from the Lightning. And so while they are able to eventually kill off the rest of that power play, it still isn't that much longer before the Kraken have a defensive breakdown, and the puck ends up in the back of the net anyway to give the Lightning the 1-0 lead, and the Kraken their 7th consecutive game, giving up the first goal of the game. Okay, I suppose to be fair with this first goal for the Lightning, while the Kraken probably did spend a little too long in their defensive end without getting the puck at least across the blue line to cause a reset for the Lightning, and did get hemmed in a little bit, it was just kind of a nice play by the Lightning that ends up getting this first one in. It's a shot from way up in the corner by the blue line that's just tipped very nicely in front by Cirelli that ends up beating a screened Grubauer between Schultz and Cirelli. He doesn't really see this tip happen. And even with that being said, it's a very nice redirect that goes right into the side of the net as Grubauer's trying to respond to the shot. And just like that, it's 1-0 Lightning. The second goal the Kraken give up, though, the same can absolutely not be said for. This one is absolutely just an abject defensive breakdown, and to be honest, it is pretty much just Alexiak's fault that this one ends up in. Now, Alexiak has had a fantastic season. I've been saying all season long so far that he's been one of the best defensive defensemen for the Kraken so far to this point, but this is not one of his best plays, which I think is pretty clear from the screenshot of this goal for the Lightning, as Alexiak is all the way up in the middle of the slot with three other Kraken players, or at least two anyway. Tanev's a little bit more off to the side, but it's leaving not just any old Lightning player. With this goal that he puts in, he ties the league lead for goals to this point in the season with 18. So as far as players to completely forget about, he's a pretty bad one to let that happen to, though I suppose it hardly even matters who the Lightning had here next to the Kraken net, as all one of the other more talented Lightning forwards in Braden Point had to do was get the pass to him for this to be a goal and give Grubauer absolutely no chance. He puts it in, and it's 2-0 Lightning. For now the 6th out of the last 7 games, the Kraken are down 2-0. And then, after a horrendously sloppy first period by the Kraken, where they were outshot 14-4, and 3 of those 4 shots for the Kraken came in the first couple of minutes of the game, they followed that up with just more of the same to start out the first few minutes of the second. And it is at that point that they finally wake up into the game and start actually playing. Unfortunately, however, it's also at that same point, or right around the same time, that Justin Schultz takes a puck off of the face, maybe off his own stick or another Kraken player's stick. Either way, a puck hits him in the face. He would leave the game and not return, which is already bad to be down a defenseman in particular, but especially when that defenseman is the D partner of your rookie who's playing his second ever game. Though for what it's worth, Evans didn't really seem fazed by it and continued to play well throughout the rest of this game. Another great game for him, especially looking good in the offensive end, so at least that's a bright spot for the Kraken. Either way, he continued to play well in this game, mostly paired with Alexiak beyond this point, but also got some shifts with Dunn, I think a couple with Borgen, and maybe even Larson, so they definitely mixed him in here and there to at least get him some more minutes. In the end, actually, he got a few more seconds than Borgen at the end of the game with just under 17 minutes, so yeah, Evans continuing to play well at the NHL level. Even with Schultz leaving, though, it is right around that same time that the Kraken finally start to get their first real momentum of the game. I suppose they did actually have one time where it looked like they had brought it to within one with their first goal before Tampa had that power play early on in the second, as Shore, of all people, tipped a puck in, but it would be challenged by the Lightning for offside, and sure enough, Yamamoto was at least a couple of feet offside, so it was a pretty easy one for them to call back. It took the wind out of the sails for the Kraken a little bit, then they go on the power play, they kill that off, Schultz leaves the game, and then they start to get the real momentum, getting shots off on goal, really for the first time since the first couple of minutes of the first period. But even at that point, it was pretty back and forth between the two teams. So this, here, kind of 5 minutes into the second, is the first time the Kraken have really had sustained pressure at the Tampa end of the ice, and eventually, it does lead to their first goal that would actually stand, as the Kraken just kind of pass the puck around the outside of the offensive end, and eventually Bjorkstrand from high in the faceoff circle and along the boards fires off a shot and just snipes it past Vasilevsky, who might have been screened a little bit by Gord, but this is definitely the type of save that you usually see Vasilevsky make, especially a goaltender of his caliber. Just kind of reacts to the shot from Bjorkstrand late, and it finds the top corner, a perfect placement by Bjorkstrand, and the Kraken do pull to within 1. And for Bjorkstrand, his 8th now on the season, which does put him on pace for around 23 to 24, so a few more than he had last season. It also gives him his 300th career point, so congratulations to Bjorkstrand on that, and the Kraken are able to maintain that momentum out of it, and just a couple minutes later, they tie it up at 2, as Eberle finds a crashing Alexiak wide open in the slot. Alexiak fires off the one-timer, and once again, it's a potentially screened Vasilevsky. Either way, though, whether or not Vasilevsky was screened by his own player here, he once again reacts slowly to the Alexiak shot, which goes right into the side of the net on the near side past the blocker of Vasilevsky, and the Kraken have tied things up, and for Alexiak, he also, I guess, kind of makes up for the goal that he is mostly responsible for in the first period. And I suppose for Alexiak, while he's certainly not on pace for the 9 goals that he had last season, this now second goal of the season for him is already more than he had in the inaugural season, so at least there's one thing going better for the Kraken than it did that year to this point. From here, the Kraken do continue to play the rest of the period pretty well, although the momentum is kind of killed off by a Tampa power play here late in the second. And while the Kraken do kill that off, they aren't able to score even with a power play of their own to finish off the last minute and kind of 15 seconds of the second period. That being said, they still do get to start with 45-ish seconds of a power play to start out the third, and a game that is now back tied at 2, even after that horrendous first period that they played. And wouldn't you know it, but the Kraken make the most of that remaining power play time as they win the opening faceoff, get right into the offensive end with Bjorkstrand carrying it in. They're able to win a puck battle along the boards to maintain the offensive end, and a couple of passes later, Eberle to Dunn to McCann. McCann winds up from his spot on the power play right at that high part of the faceoff circle on the left side, or I guess right side from the goaltender's perspective. Either way, McCann winds up, fires off the shot, and it's an absolute bullet to the top corner of the net to give the Kraken the power play goal, beating Vasilevsky over the glove hand shoulder to give him his 13th and the Kraken the 3-2 lead. Sadly, though, as we know, it's a 3-2 lead that would not last for the Kraken. They really aren't able to build much momentum off of this 14 seconds into the third period goal from McCann on the power play. They do almost, well, they at least get a good scoring chance right after that at 5-on-5, getting right back into the offensive end, but things even out here throughout the third period. And then kind of midway through, Tampa evens things up on just it's a type of play that's very emblematic of this season for the Kraken. It's an unfortunate series of events as the Kraken are actually doing a good job getting the puck deep into the offensive end. Bjorkstrand, I think, is actually the one that carries it in. He drops it for Gord, and then that drop to Gord is kind of broken up by the official along the boards. Gord isn't able to handle it cleanly, tries to shove it back to what he thinks is going to be a defenseman coming into the offensive end behind him, but instead the Kraken defense went off on a change, which then leads this into a breakaway, or not breakaway, but a rush chance for Tampa back the other way. I suppose at the very least for the Kraken, they are able to complete the change and get, I think it was Larson and Evans out on the ice in time to at least not make this what would have been probably at least a 2-on-0, if not a 3-on-0 coming back the other way after the turnover helped by the official along the boards. It turns into more of a 2-on-2 or a 3-on-2. Unfortunately, however, it hardly matters that those two guys got onto the ice for the Kraken as the Lightning get right through the offensive end on credit where it's due, just a very nice tic-tac-toe passing play on the rush from up by the blue line to the other side, back to the side of the net, where Evans did kind of make a bit of a defensive blunder here by letting Nick Paul past him. He's trying to defend two guys on the same rush, but as a defenseman, it's kind of your job to make sure nobody gets past you. Paul does get past him, and that's the guy that ends up finishing it, putting it past Decord. There's really not anything Decord can do about it, and that ties the game at 3. And, oh, by the way, Decord was in for the third period of this game, as within the final 10 seconds of the second period, Grubauer diving from one side of the net to the other to make a save on I think it was a shorthanded rush. It would have been since the Kraken were on a power play, making a save on a shorthanded rush. Grubauer ends up, it looked like he just had his groin explode on him. He dives from one side to the other in the splits and then just crumples to the side of the net. The Kraken are able to get the puck back down to the other end, so Grubauer stays in for the final 10 seconds of the period, but again did not return to the game or even bench for that matter in the third period, which is certainly not a good sign. Hackstall, after the fact, said he had no update on Grubauer. That, though, is pretty par for the course. There's very rarely updates on injuries to players right after the game finishes. So we'll probably find out sometime tomorrow or today by when you're watching this, or maybe the next day. I would be very surprised if Grubauer, well, obviously he probably wouldn't play the second half of a back-to-back anyway, but certainly after this injury, it did look everything like a groin pull or strain though, so this could end up being a longer-term injury for Grubauer. Honestly, and this is speculation, but I would not be surprised to see week-to-week or even a potential IR stint for Grubauer coming up here in the near future, which is obviously not great for the Kraken, even outside of losing a goaltender, which is never good, especially with the way Grubauer was playing in these last couple of games, and very much in this game where he was the best Kraken player on the ice while he was on it for them. It's not a great sign. Fortunately, the Kraken still do have another NHL-level goaltender in Drieger that they can call up, and for what it's worth, for all we know, Drieger could come up and go right back to being an NHL-quality goaltender. We just haven't seen him play in the NHL for the better part of 2 years now. Anyway, getting back to the game for the Kraken, which they are now playing this entire third period and overtime down their starting goaltender and one of their defensemen. They still do get a couple more chances in this third period to win it in regulation. They have a power play late in the third that they do have, they move the puck around pretty well. They just aren't able to score. Then they get another power play in the final seconds of the third, which it's just 15 seconds, so they aren't able to score at the end of regulation, but it does mean that it carries over into a 4-on-3 power play to start overtime. which again they aren't able to score on, and eventually it's a rush back the other way for Tampa the first time they really get possession of the puck, and a nice pass from one side to the other as Beniers isn't able to get back on the back check in time, ends up in the back of the net past Decord, and the Lightning win 4-3 in overtime. And in so doing, handing the Kraken now their 7th already overtime or shootout loss, which is already one fewer than they had all of last season and one more than they had their entire inaugural season, and puts them on pace for a historic amount of these loser points. So it'll probably slow down as the season goes along, but they have accrued quite a bit of these, extra points for losing games. And obviously 1 point is better than nothing, but for the Kraken, where they're at, if they do want to have hopes of turning the season around, which I mean, as far as the team is concerned, and was said as much in, I think, Wemberg the game before, and Eberle after this game's own words, they are still in this, and that technically is true. If they went on a winning streak, just like Edmonton is kind of doing right now, they could work their way back into this wildcard conversation and try to turn this season around. But if that's going to happen, they do need to actually start stringing wins together and not just overtime losses. And look, for what it's worth, even if that does sound maybe a bit delusional from the player's perspective, it is quite literally their job to not give up on the season and believe that they can come back, even if at some points, like the first period in this game, for example, it does look like they've already given up. Either way, it was nice to see them actually fight back once again to at least get this game to overtime. And in fact, they fought back from a 2-0 deficit to actually take a lead for the first time in 7 games in this one, even if they did eventually give up that lead and go to overtime where they then lost. They at least did finally have a lead for the first time in a while and fought back to get there. Plus, the guys that you'd like to see playing well as far as the future is concerned, the guys that are under contract for a few more years in Bjorkstrand and McCann, as well as the younger players like, Riker Evans, like I already said, played very well in this game again, especially in the offensive end. It is very clear that this is a talented young player. I mean, to be honest, and granted, it has just been 2 games, so try not to overreact too much, but he's looked so good in these 2 games and at such a young age that if he's able to continue to build off of how he's looked so far at the NHL level and how quickly that transition has happened for him, this is a guy that could very quickly develop into the Kraken's best option on the defensive end. Again, way too early to say for sure, but it is at least a very strong start for him, and much more akin to, even without the scoring, what we saw from, say, Beniers in his first couple of games. Obviously, Beniers playing center is a little bit more likely to get on the scoring sheet than a defenseman. Either way, it's been an impressive start for Evans in these 2 games, and I would expect to be seeing a lot more of him going forward, especially if Schultz does miss any time with that puck to the face. And you know what? While we're on the subject of things looking good for this team going on into the next few years and the future being bright for this team, even if this season does continue to go poorly, even outside of how things are going at the NHL level with how Evans has been playing, as well as some of those guys that are probably going to be part of the core going forward, it's also continued to go well, not just at the AHL level, but in juniors on top of that, as the Kraken, with the Canadian World Juniors roster, or camp roster anyway, being announced a few days ago, and this was around the time of the last Kraken game, I just forgot to mention it, there were 3 Kraken prospects named to that Team Canada, at least camp roster anyway, which is more than any other NHL team, those being Ty Nelson, Carson Raycroft, and of course Furcus. How many of those guys actually play a significant amount for the World Juniors Canadian team, we'll have to wait and see, but it's certainly a good sign that the Kraken continue to get recognition for things going well in their player development farther on through the farm system. And yes, don't worry, I will be doing my best to keep tabs on that, as well as a couple of players for Team Finland that are also in the Kraken system coming up here for the World Juniors, and how those guys do if they do end up playing in the World Juniors as things go on here for the next couple of months. Aside from that, though, we will try to just move on from this game, as we do have another half of a back-to-back coming up later today when you're watching this against the Wild. So let's get to the Kraken 3 stars, where as always, it's brought to you by the patrons over on Patreon. And as always, if you do want to be part of helping decide these Kraken 3 stars after each and every one of the Kraken's games this season and going forward, you can help support this channel a little bit more than you already are by watching to this point by going to the link down below to Patreon and supporting there as well. As for 3 stars, we can probably get 3 for the Kraken in this one. My first star, even though he didn't play the 3rd period, he really did keep the Kraken in this game and make that first period not just straight up embarrassing. I'm going with Philip Grubauer. Again, Grubauer is the only reason the Kraken even had a chance to come back in this game with how he played in that first period, and had a couple of good saves in the second before, again, whatever injury he sustained there at the very end of the second period. Other than him, I'm going to go McCann with the second star. He does give the Kraken the lead with that power play goal, but also played a pretty good game other than that. And then the third star, I think I'll go with Jordan Eberle. He has 2 assists in the game and also had a pretty good game. It's been a kind of quiet start to the season for Eberle. That line with him and Beniers, and then whoever they throw up there with him and Beniers, has been not the first line that we kind of hoped it would be coming into the season, and certainly not the first line that we saw throughout the end of last season and playoffs, but hopefully they'll get something going here in the near future. They had Cartier on that line with the 2 of them, which we saw in the playoffs last season again. So Hackstall trying things to get things going there. For that matter, Beniers did almost score in this game. He had a nice play there right before the goal by Alexiak, where he actually got it around Vasilevsky, but just couldn't get the stick on the puck one last time to shove it over the goal line, as it ended up going through the crease behind Vasilevsky and free to the other side. Again, the Kraken were still able to maintain pressure off of that, and it was eventually Alexiak that scored in that same, at least, sequence of events. I think they did have to get back into the offensive end before Alexiak scored. Either way, it's been a slow start for Beniers, but there are some promising signs here and there that he's going to get things turned around, hopefully sooner rather than later. With all that said, though, I am going to call it for this one, again, with it being the first half of a back-to-back. So let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Hopefully in a few hours' time, we'll see the first win here in a couple of weeks now for the Kraken against the Wild. We'll just have to wait and see, though. So at least for now, if you have made it to this point, thank you very much for watching. If you did like or enjoy this video, the buttons for that kind of stuff down below help support the channel, so I appreciate you using them. Until next time, stay safe out there, be good to each other, God bless, and go Kraken.